But by convention, we use the word index for the main page of an app. So when we go to /products, this will be the main page of our products app. Now, potentially in the future, we could support additional URLs inside of this app. For example, products/new or trending and so on. So we call this function index. Now, all our view functions should always take a parameter, and that is the HTTP request that is passed to this view function. So as I told you before, when we navigate to /products, our browser sends an HTTP request to our web server. Django takes this request and sends it to our view function. With this request object, we can find information about the client. Now, in this tutorial, we don't want to worry about HTML. We just want to return some plain text to the browser, like hello world. So on the top, from Django.http module, we need to import a class called HTTP response. With this class, we can create an HTTP response to return to the client or the browser. So back to our view function. Here we return an HTTP response object. So we're creating an instance of this class, right? Now, as an argument to the constructor, we pass hello world. Now we need to add an extra blank line above the index function to make PyCharm happy. Beautiful. As simple as that. So we are done with this view function, but nowhere Django knows that it should call this function when we send a request to /products. So we need to tell Django that, hey, whenever there is a request to /products, call this index function. We need to map this URL to this function. A URL is short for Uniform Resource Locator, and that basically means address. Okay, so let's do the mapping. We're done with this module, close it. Back to our products app, right-click this folder and add a new Python file. Call that URLs. The name is very important here. This is one of the conventions that Django framework defines. So we need to follow this convention to structure our project. Okay, so this adds urls.py inside of the products app. Now in this module, once again, by convention, we should define a variable called URL patterns. Make sure to spell it exactly as you see here. So there is no underscore between these two words, and all characters are in lowercase. So we set this to a list object. In this list, we map various URLs to their view functions. Now to reference a URL, we need to import the path function. So on the top, from Django.urls, let's import the path function. With this function, we can map a URL to a view function. So we call the path function. The first argument is a string that specifies our URL endpoint. Here we pass an empty string that is a string with no characters in it. And this represents the root of this app. Let me show you what I mean. So imagine our app starts at /products. So if the user sends a request to this endpoint, they will be at the root of this app. Potentially here we could have other URLs like /products, /one, /detail, or /products, /new, or trending, or whatever. So all the URLs in this app start with /products. Okay? Now back to the first example. What happens if we take away this /products? We are left with nothing. And that is why we use an empty string here. Now, as the second argument to this function, we need to specify our view function. So we defined that view function inside of the views module. So first we need to import this module into the URLs module. Now, this is how we do this. From period import views. Period means the current folder. So from the current folder, we are importing the views module. So with this syntax, we're telling Django to import the views module that we have in this folder. Now you might ask, Mosh, why didn't we import the views module like this? Import views, because views is actually in the current folder. So why do we have to use the from import syntax? The reason for this is because views is kind of a generic name. So it is possible that our project has a dependency to another library called views. With this syntax, Python will end up importing that module instead of the views module in the current folder because that will take priority. So to remove these potential issues, we use the from import syntax. So now we imported the views module. As you know, when we import a module, that module will end up being an object. So we can use the dot operator to access the functions defined in that module. So here we want to reference the index function. Okay, let's delete it from here. Back to our path function. As the second argument, we type out views.index. Now note that I'm not calling this function. I'm simply passing a reference to it. Django will take care of calling this function at runtime when the client sends an HTTP request to the server. So here we should not call this function. So let's quickly recap what we have done up to this point. In the views module, we created this view function. And in this view function, we simply return some plain text to the browser or the client. Now, I told you that nowhere Django knows that it should call this function. So that's why we added the URLs module to our app. And in this module, we mapped the root URL to this view function. There's one more step left. We need to tell Django about this app, because up to this point, Django is not aware of this app. So let's collapse the products folder and open up the PyShop folder. In this folder, we have another URLs module, and this is like the root or the parent URLs module in our Django project. Let's open this and scroll down. Once again, you see this URL patterns variable that is set to a list. In this list, again, we're calling the path function. As the first argument, we're telling Django that, hey, any URLs that start with admin, delegate them to the admin app. So every Django project by default comes with this admin app, which gives us a beautiful administrative panel. We're going to work with that soon. So in this module, we should also tell Django about our products app. So let's add another object to this list. Once again, we call the path function. Now we tell Django that, hey, any paths or any URLs that start with products / delegate them to the products app. So we want Django to delegate the handling of that request to this URLs module that we defined in the products app. Okay, how do we do that? Very easy. Back to the main or the parent URLs module. On line 16, we have this import statement. Let's expand it. So basically, we have two import statements. Look at the second one. From Django.urls module, we're importing the path function. There is another function that we need to import, and that is the include function. Now we're going to use this function on line 21. So as the second argument to the path function, we call include. And here we need to reference the URLs module in the products app. So we type out products.urls. So take a look. In the products app, we have this module, URLs. That is why we type products.urls. But we don't type out .py. Django will automatically take care of that. Now, at this point, you might be a little bit confused or intimidated by all these various steps that you have to follow. They may look foreign to you, but trust me, this becomes second nature as you practice building Django applications. It's actually very easy. It's just the first time that you have to follow these conventions defined in Django framework. Once you understand the concept, it becomes really easy. So basically, because we created a new app, the products app, only once ever, we need to write this line of code to tell Django that, hey, any URLs that start with products / send them to the URLs module in the products app. So we write this line of code only once. Anytime in the future, we want to define a new view function. First, we go to the views module, we create a new function, and then we go to the URLs module in that app and define a new URL pattern to map that view function to a URL endpoint. That is really easy. All right, now let's test our application. So back to the browser, let's head over to /products. There you go. You see our hello world message here, beautiful. But if we navigate back to the home page, we get this error, page not found. So our beautiful Django homepage disappeared. And the reason for this is that homepage is automatically generated and is only displayed when we first create a Django project. As soon as we define a new URL pattern and register it in our project, that homepage disappears. But don't worry, we're going to come back and create a new function for our homepage later in the course. Now here's your exercise. I want you to modify this Django project such that when we navigate to products/new, we'll see a page here with some text like new products. I strongly encourage you to do this exercise because it makes it really easy for you to follow the future tutorials. All right, here in the products app, let's open up the views module. In this module, we define a new view function. So define, let's call that function new. As I told you before, every view function should take this request parameter. Now here we want to return an HTTP response with the text new products. That's it. Now to make PyCharm happy, we add another line break here. So we have 2 line breaks after the index function and also 2 line breaks after the new function. These are the best practices defined in PEP 8 to format our code. So we're done with this view function. Now we need to map it to a URL endpoint. So we go back to the products app and open up the URLs module. Here we need to add another URL pattern. So we call the path function. The first argument should be new. You want to map this URL endpoint to views.new function. That's all you had to do. Now back to our browser. When we navigate to products/new, we get this message in the browser. Beautiful. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to create a model in a Django project. A model is a representation of a real-world concept. For example, in an online shop, we could have models like order, customer, shopping cart, product, review, and so on. So let's go ahead and create our first model. Here in the products app, open up the models module. In this module, we're going to create a new class called product. So let's delete this comment. We don't really need it. Class product. Now we need to inherit this class from the model class in Django. So in parentheses, we type out models.model. Let's see what's going on here. So on line 1, from Django.db package, we are importing the models module. In this module, we have a class called model, and this class defines all the common characteristics and behavior for models in a Django application. For example, we want to be able to store these models in a database, or read them from a database, or delete them. These are all the common operations that we need to perform on these model objects. So by inheriting this product class from this model class, our product class will have all these capabilities built into it. We don't have to code it, okay? So, colon. Now in this class, we need to define a few attributes. What are the attributes of a product that we need to know in an online shop? We need to know their name, price, stock, image, and so on. So let's define a new attribute. We call it name, and we set it to an instance of models.charField class. So once again, in this module, we have a class called charField, which is short for character field, and this represents a field that can contain textual data. Now here, as a best practice, we can supply a maximum length to prevent a malicious user or hacker from accidentally storing a product with an enormously large name. This can mess up with our application. So let's pass a keyword argument, max length, and we set it to 255 characters. Now let's define the price attribute. So we set price to models.float field. So this represents a field that can contain floating point numbers. That's it. Now let's define the stock. We set this to an instance of models.integer field. And finally, let's define image underline URL to an instance of once again, char field. So in this course, we're going to use Google to find an image for our products. For example, we can find this image, right-click it, and copy its link address, which is the URL. Now, if you open up a new tab and paste that URL, you can see this is a very long string. So we don't want to enforce a maximum length.